Florida is deploying robotic rabbits to help capture invasive Burmese pythons in the Everglades.
Florida just admitted its multi-million-dollar Robo-Rabbit project was a complete disaster. The high-tech heat-emitting decoys were supposed to lure pythons.
Researchers turned to tech, hoping robotic rabbits can lure the snakes out.
Instead, they became $4,000 chew toys for alligators. It was a total failure. At least that's what everyone thought, but a young data analyst looking at the footage from the last surviving robots noticed something impossible. The pythons were afraid. And what they were afraid of just gave hunters the key to the entire invasion, revealing a secret they were never meant to see. The end of the old Everglades. When the glades began to vanish. At sunrise, the Florida Everglades glows like a living mirror. You see, it's a world of shimmering sawgrass over slow-moving water where herons stand as still as statues. It's a place of subtle, staggering beauty. But what most people don't realize is that the Everglades isn't a swamp. It's a river. A vast, shallow, slow-moving river of grass, 50 miles wide, spanning 1.5 million acres, moving almost imperceptibly from Lake Okeechobee to the Florida Bay. At least that's what it was. For decades, this unique wilderness has been under a silent and coiling attack. The invader isn't a chemical spill or a new development. It's alive, it's hungry, and it has proven to be, to put it mildly, unstoppable. The Burmese python, a predator born in the jungles of Southeast Asia, it has turned Florida's wetlands into its own personal all-you-can-eat buffet. The thing nobody tells you is that this invasion wasn't an act of nature. It was a human mistake, a 1-2 punch of carelessness and bad luck. The first punch was the exotic pet trade in the 1980s and 90s. Back then, baby pythons were sold as harmless, novel curiosities. You could walk into a strip mall pet store and walk out with a future apex predator for $50. They were glossy, beautifully patterned, and small enough to rest in a child's hands. But here's the catch. Those pets grew, and they grew fast. A 6-inch hatchling, fed a steady diet of mice, can become an 8-foot, 20-pound-plus monster in just 2 years. Within a few short years, many reached staggering lengths of 15 to 20 feet. These weren't pets anymore, they were cousins of the anaconda. They became powerful enough to overpower a deer or even a 6-foot alligator. Owners, completely unprepared for a monster in their guest room that ate whole chickens, began quietly releasing them into the canals and swamps at the edge of the city. They thought they were giving their pet freedom. What they were really doing was lighting a fuse. The second punch was the explosion. In 1992, Hurricane Andrew tore through South Florida. This wasn't just a storm, it was an ecological reset button. The Category 5 winds at 165 miles per hour didn't just rip roofs off houses, they tore apart the flimsy, ramshackle reptile breeding facilities and exotic pet warehouses that dotted the edge of the swamp. The storm destroyed countless compounds, releasing an unknown but massive number of pythons into the wild. Those escaped snakes, now battle-hardened and free, met the released pets. They found each other and they seeded the population that would later engulf the Everglades. For a python, this new world was paradise. It was in many ways better than their native jungle in Asia, where they had to compete with tigers and king cobras. The Everglades offered warmth, endless water, and most importantly, prey that had never evolved to fear a giant constrictor. Raccoons, rabbits, and wading birds had no defense. They didn't even know to run. And the python itself is a perfect predator. It's a biological tank. It hunts not by sight, but by heat, using 2 rows of l'Oreal pits on its snout. These are essentially thermal imaging cameras. It can see the body heat of a tiny mouse in complete darkness. It also tastes the air with its tongue, pulling in scent particles to an advanced chemical sensor on the roof of its mouth called the Jacobson's organ. It can, quite literally, taste your footsteps. With no natural predators of their own and the shocking ability for a single large female to lay up to 100 eggs at a time, their population exploded. Biologists now estimate that tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, roam South Florida. What they've done to the food web is catastrophic. It's not just damage, it's a total rewrite of an entire ecosystem. In areas where pythons are dominant, there has been a near-total disappearance of raccoons, opossums, and marsh rabbits. We're talking populations dropping by over 90%. One famous and horrifying study by the University of Florida found that raccoon populations have dropped 99.3%, opossums 98.9%, and bobcats, the native hunters, down over 87%. Essentially, the small mammals are gone. The swamp has fallen silent. The snakes are just efficient. One large python was found with an adult deer, a 76-pound doe, inside its stomach. In another case, researchers found a python that had tried to swallow a 6-foot alligator whole. The battle was so intense that both animals were lost in the struggle. The loss of these species creates a devastating chain reaction. Fewer small mammals mean less food for native birds of prey like eagles and hawks. Fewer scavengers mean decaying matter lingers, altering the very soil. The pythons are not just eating the Everglades, they are starving it. And the fight to stop them has been a long losing battle. But this perfect predator has one hidden weakness: the Judas deception. For years, Florida officials treated the python problem like a pest issue. They were in denial. But as the mammal populations crashed, the state was finally forced to act. Their first idea was to turn the invasion into a sport. In 2013, they launched the Python Challenge. It was a massive media event, a call to arms for anyone brave enough to step into the swamp. The state government, desperate for a solution and some good PR, framed it as a giant patriotic sport. Cash prizes were offered: $1,500 for the longest snake, another $1,000 for the most snakes captured public glory, and the thrill of the hunt were the real bait. And get this, they came in droves. Over 1,600 people from 30 different states signed up. They came with airboats, machetes, high-powered flashlights, camouflage gear, and a whole lot of confidence. News crews followed them into the sawgrass, filming these self-styled python hunters as they wrestled with the swamp. It was reality TV meets environmental disaster. But the swamp is a tough place, and the python is a master of camouflage. Its intricate mosaic-like skin pattern, so beautiful in a pet store, makes it completely invisible in the dappled light of the sawgrass. You don't find a python, you step on a python. And the Everglades, remember, is a 1.5 million acre haystack. After weeks of effort, the combined haul from 1,600 hunters was just 68 snakes. 68, out of tens, maybe hundreds of thousands. That's an average of 0.04 snakes per hunter. It was a PR stunt, not a solution. It proved definitively that amateurs were not the answer. The snakes were just too good at hiding. So they moved on to a more professional strategy: the python removal program. This wasn't a contest, it was a job. The state, along with the South Florida Water Management District, began paying licensed, vetted hunters to patrol the levees and remote areas. This was serious business. These weren't amateurs, they were swamp veterans, professional trappers, and biologists who knew the terrain. They were paid an hourly wage, around $13 an hour, just to search. And then the bonuses kicked in. $50 for any python up to 4 feet long, and an extra $25 for every foot after that. A 10-foot snake could net a hunter a couple $100. This program was more successful. These pros have removed thousands of pythons over the years. But the math is brutal. It costs millions to pay contractors to hunt over such a massive area. These hunters are effective, but they are just one small part of the solution. For every snake they remove, 2 more seem to take its place. It's like trying to empty the ocean with a bucket. The state was spending a fortune for what amounted to lawn maintenance. They were cutting the grass, not pulling up the roots. They needed to find the roots, the breeding grounds. This led to a more clever, high-tech deception: the Judas snakes. This was a brilliant idea on paper. Biologists would capture a large male python, surgically implant a radio transmitter inside its body, and then release it back into the wild during the winter breeding season. The Judas snake, driven by instinct, would then do what males do: find a female. And in the python world, breeding is a group activity. They form massive breeding balls where dozens of males will swarm a single large female. The Judas snake, now with a tracker, would lead the hunters directly to these aggregations. It helped. It led to some key captures of massive egg-laying females. But it wasn't enough. The Everglades was just too big. The batteries in the trackers would die, the snakes would vanish into deep water holes where the radio signals couldn't reach. And the program was expensive and slow. The state realized brute force, whether from amateurs or professionals, was a failing game. They weren't outmanned, they were out-evolved. They were trying to see an animal that was a master of not being seen. They needed a hunter that didn't use its eyes. A new radical idea was forming. Stop hunting the snake. Make the snake hunt you. When dogs went to war. When the bounty programs failed to make a dent, wildlife managers realized they needed to change the game. They needed a hunter that didn't rely on sight or luck, but on an ancient, powerful instinct. That's when Florida turned to an ally as old as humanity itself, the dog. In recent years, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, or FWC, launched a small but daring experiment. 2 dogs, trained like elite narcotics detectives, would be sent into the swamps to do what humans could not: smell the invisible. Their names were Truman and Eleanor. Truman, a black Labrador, had the friendly, goofy face of a family pet but a nose that was 1,000,000 times more sensitive than any human's. Eleanor, a Dutch Shepherd with sharp, alert eyes, was all business, bred for precision and focus. For months, they were trained. This wasn't simple fetch. This was advanced biological detection. Trainers used python-scented cloths, shed snake skins, and even snake eggs, hiding them in increasingly difficult locations. The dogs were trained to recognize the faint, musky, almost earthy sweet odor that Burmese pythons leave behind. It's a scent humans can't detect at all, but which lingers in the grass and mud long after the snake has passed. They were trained to give a passive alert, to sit or lie down, not bark, to avoid startling the massive hidden predator. Once in the field, the results came fast. In their first few months, the Canine duo helped capture several large snakes that had eluded human crews for weeks. Truman's tail would stiffen, his whole body would go rigid. Eleanor would circle, nose low to the ground, and suddenly freeze, pointing her handler toward a dense patch of brush, the universal sign that prey was near. Moments later, a handler's flashlight beam would catch the slow, unmistakable ripple of scales. These dogs were finding pythons in minutes where biologists had searched for hours. But as with everything in the Everglades, success came at a price. The swamp is a tough, brutal place to work. The heat is extreme, often topping 100 degrees Fahrenheit with crushing 99% humidity. The dogs, wearing high-tech cooling vests and special reinforced boots to protect their paws from the razor-sharp sawgrass, could only work for short 20-minute bursts before needing to rest and rehydrate in their air-conditioned trucks. And of course, the area is full of other dangers like alligators and venomous cottonmouths, which the dogs also had to be trained to avoid. What many overlooked, however, was the real problem: scale. Truman and Eleanor were amazing, but they were only 2 dogs. The Everglades, remember, is 1.5 million acres. To cover that much ground, the state would need hundreds, maybe thousands of dog teams, costing millions upon millions in training and support. It was a brilliant tool, but it wasn't the final solution. It was another drop in the bucket. This victory, however, sparked a new and controversial question. The dogs proved that scent was the key. So what if the bait could attract the snakes to the hunters? This led scientists down an unsettling path, one that blurred the line between biology and desperation. They began small, controlled studies using live marsh rabbits, the python's natural prey. They built secure, double-enforced pens, cages within cages, designed to protect the rabbits from any direct attack. They placed them in high-traffic, swampy trails. The rabbits, terrified but physically unharmed, became scent magnets. The smell of a living, breathing mammal, a smell that had all but vanished from the glades, was like a siren song. Within weeks, pythons began appearing one after another, slithering toward the enclosures, drawn by the undeniable smell of a living meal. The principle was proven. Prey attraction worked, but the moral cost was high. The images of trembling live rabbits surrounded by giant coiling constrictors sparked immediate outrage from animal welfare groups. The experiments were labeled as cruel, as psychological torture for the rabbits, even if they were never touched. The public was horrified. Under immense pressure, the funding for live bait trials was pulled. The program was shut down. They were back at square one. The dogs were too few. The live bait was too controversial. They were running out of options. They couldn't use live animals. So they decided to build one, a high-tech $4,000 rabbit to be exact. The alligator ambush. This is where the story truly gets weird. With the live bait program finished, engineers from the U.S. Geological Survey, or USGS, teamed up with wildlife biologists. They had the blueprint, they knew what a python wanted, or rather what its ancient heat-seeking brain was programmed to hunt. It wasn't a rabbit. It was a collection of signals: the heat of a small mammal, the scent of its fur, and the slight twitch of life. So they started building. The project was called the Robo-Rabbit. Each decoy was a marvel of practical, rugged design. Built from weather-resistant polymers and coated in synthetic fur, they were made to survive the swamp. But the real magic was inside. A special thermal pad powered by a waterproofed lithium-ion battery emitted a constant heat signature nearly identical to a living marsh rabbit's 99-degree Fahrenheit body temperature. This made the robot glow in the dark to a python's heat-sensing pits. But that's not all. Tiny, battery-powered emitters hidden in the fur released a chemical compound, a proprietary musk that could drift on the swamp breeze. And get this, some advanced models even had tiny motors, micro-servos, to make their ears and nose twitch randomly. They were, in effect, perfect bait. They were also very expensive. Each one cost nearly $4,000 to build. Hidden within the chest cavity of each robot was a motion-triggered camera, a thermal imager, and a satellite transmitter. Whenever something warm or large slithered close, the system would activate, sending a silent alert to biologists stationed miles away, along with a live video feed. And to power it all, small, efficient solar panels were embedded in the protective cage they sat in, allowing them to operate for weeks without maintenance. The plan was simple, if a bit futuristic. They anchored 120 of these robotic rabbits, each inside a protective pen, in known python hotspots: levees, canal banks, and tree islands. The goal wasn't to harm the snakes directly. The pens were supposedly python-proof. The real goal was to lure them into these monitored zones where trained teams could then move in and remove them. It was a digital trap. When the first units were deployed, no one knew if it would work. Would the snakes be smart enough to see the difference? The first 2 days were a stunning success. The alert started pinging almost immediately. The field cameras captured incredible high-definition footage. Massive pythons, some over 15 feet long, approached the decoys. They flicked their tongues, sensing the heat and smell. Then they struck, coiling their massive bodies around the cages of the fake rabbits. Squeezing with thousands of pounds of pressure, the teams moved in and captured snake after snake. It was working. It was finally working. And then day 3 happened. An alert came in from a decoy near a deep water canal. The biologist watching the feed expected a python. Instead, the camera, now in night vision mode, showed a dark, log-like shape moving fast through the water. But this log had 2 glowing red eyes. It was a 12-foot alligator. The gator wasn't confused. It was drawn by the exact same sensory triggers. It saw a warm, twitching, struggling animal. In one violent, horrifying explosion of water, the alligator charged the pen. It didn't try to slither, it attacked its jaws, which can snap shut with over 2,000 pounds of force, crushed the python-proof pen and the $4,000 robot inside in a single catastrophic bite. The video feed went to static. The robots, it turned out, were the perfect lure for everything. The thing nobody tells you is that pythons and alligators are ancient enemies. They are the 2 apex predators of the Everglades, and they compete for food, territory, and survival. Now, humans had just dropped 120 flashing, warm, smelly dinner bells all over their shared hunting grounds. What happened next was the insane part. A new predator war began. The alligators, who are incredibly smart and learn fast, realized that these new rabbits were easy if unsatisfying meals. They began hunting the robots. They destroyed dozens of them. The pythons, in turn, sensing the massive alligators, their only real threat, started avoiding the traps entirely. Why go near a free meal if it means running into a 12-foot gator? The project was, to put it mildly, a complete disaster. The multi-million-dollar experiment was failing. The expensive machines were being crunched into scrap metal, and the pythons were vanishing. The project was on the verge of being shut down. But the robots had a secret they had recorded in their final moments. The project was failing, but the robots had recorded something else. Decoding the python. Scientists and officials were ready to pull the plug. The robotic rabbit army had failed. Millions of dollars were being crunched in the jaws of alligators. But a young data analyst on the team, tasked with sorting through the terabytes of failed footage, noticed something strange. The robots weren't just decoys, they were spies. Before being destroyed, each robot's motion sensor, thermal imager, and camera recorded everything that passed by, not just the final attack. They weren't just logging python attacks, they were logging python movements. They tracked the time of day, the temperature, the humidity, and the direction of travel for every animal that came near. What many overlooked was that by cross-referencing the data from all 120 units, especially the data from the ones that weren't attacked, a pattern emerged. The team built a digital three-dimensional map of the swamp's predator movements, and the data showed something they had never seen before. The pythons weren't just randomly slithering through the million-plus acres, they were using highways, specific hidden corridors in the water and sawgrass, dry ridges, old levees, underwater canals, to move between hunting grounds and the alligators they used them to. This is where the story goes from strange to something out of a science fiction movie. It gets even crazier. The scientists took all that data, every twitch, every failed hunt, every robotic rabbit lost, every alligator sighting, and they fed it into a powerful learning AI. The AI started chewing on the numbers, looking for deep patterns humans could never see. And it found one, a pattern so subtle it was almost invisible. The AI began to predict not just where the pythons were, but where they would be at specific times. Why? Because it had learned what the pythons feared. The AI figured out that the pythons were moving in precise, deliberate patterns to avoid their only natural predator, the alligators. The gators, being larger and more dominant, had dibs on the highways. They were the kings of the swamp. They hunted during the peak evening hours just after sunset and in the early morning just before sunrise. This is when the water is warm and their prey is active. The AI model, which the team called the Ghost Map, showed that the pythons, to avoid a confrontation, would wait. They used the same highways, but they used them in the dead of night from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. when the gators were less active, resting in deeper water. The robots hadn't just found a few snakes. They had stumbled backward into something huge. They had accidentally mapped the python's entire secret social calendar. They had decoded their movements, their fears, and their hidden schedules. They had found the python's secret weakness, their fear of alligators. Armed with this new ghost map, the hunters got a new playbook. The entire strategy shifted overnight. No more sitting and waiting at decoy sites, hoping a snake would wander by. That was old news. Instead, they used the AI's pinpoint predictions to go on the offensive. They could intercept the snakes on their secret highways, the hidden routes they used when they thought nothing was watching. The results were immediate and staggering. They weren't finding one snake at a time. They were finding groups. The AI, by tracking the specific thermal signatures and movements of the large, mature females, did the unthinkable. It led the hunters directly to the source. It took them to the breeding grounds. These were massive, completely hidden nests, places buried deep in the swamp that no human would have ever found on their own. They found dozens of females, each coiled around a clutch of 60, 80, even 90 eggs. They were removing thousands of potential pythons from the ecosystem before they ever hatched. The numbers were almost unbelievable. In just 1 month, using this new AI map, the hunters removed more invasive pythons than they had in the entire previous year of the bounty program. All that failure, All those destroyed robots, it was all worth it. The robotic rabbits, even as they were being crushed, had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams. They hadn't just helped the fight, they had changed the entire war. They had hacked the invasion. But this new data, this ghost map, also revealed something else, a new set of wild and frankly terrifying theories. The AI had revealed a schedule, but it might have also revealed a future no one wants. The unintended consequence. The ghost map was a victory, but it also opened a Pandora's box of new, terrifying questions. The AI had done its job. It found the pattern, but in finding the pattern, it hinted at other much stranger things happening in the swamp. This has led to a few wild, speculative theories that are now being seriously discussed by biologists. The first theory, accidental evolution, or the super snake theory. Think about it. The alligators are the python's only predator. For years, they have been picking off the pythons that were dumb enough or slow enough to get caught. Now, humans have entered the game. The hunters using the AI map are also picking off the pythons, specifically the ones who follow the predictable 2 to 4 a.m. schedule. But here's the catch. What about the pythons that don't follow the schedule? What about the ones that are naturally more wary? The ones that travel at 3:30 a.m. instead of 2:30? Or the ones that find a new, uncharted highway? Those snakes survive. They pass on their wary genes. The crazy part is, Florida's removal program, by being so efficient, might be acting as a high-speed evolutionary filter. We are, in effect, accidentally breeding a smarter, more elusive, and more paranoid generation of super snakes. Every snake that avoids the gators and avoids the hunters is, by definition, a master survivor. And those are the ones left to breed. We may be winning the battle, but in the long run, we might be creating a much, much worse monster. The second wild theory is even stranger, the python communication web. The AI data showed the snakes using highways, which everyone assumed was just for efficiency. But what if it's more? Pythons, like all snakes, live in a world of scent. When they move, they leave a faint chemical trail. What if these highways are not just roads, but information networks? What if the snakes are following each other's scent trails, leading them to breeding grounds or rich new hunting areas? This theory suggests the pythons are not just a collection of individuals, but a loosely connected, hive-like population, all sharing information chemically. This would explain how they find each other so quickly in a 1.5 million acre swamp. It would also mean that simply removing one snake is not enough. You have to disrupt the entire network. And the final, most down-to-earth theory is simply the next domino. The pythons are just the first wave. By wiping out 99% of the raccoons and opossums, they have completely changed the rules of the swamp. And nature hates a vacuum. With all the small mammals gone, what's next? Well, it's already here. The new invader is the tegu lizard. A 4-foot-long, intelligent lizard from South America, the tegu is also a voracious predator. And what does it eat? Eggs, alligator eggs, bird eggs, turtle eggs. The pythons ate the mammals, and now the tegus are here to eat the reptiles. Some scientists are speculating that the pythons created the perfect environment for the tegu. With no raccoons or opossums left, which are also major egg eaters, the tegu has no competition. It is a 1-2 punch that could leave the Everglades completely and irreversibly sterile. The robots, in solving one problem, have given scientists a front-row seat to the next, even bigger, disaster. The robots and the AI have changed the game, but are we just accidentally breeding a smarter, better super snake for the next round? What do you think? Let us know below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.